Good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and call to order the County Planning Commission for March 25th, 2024. If you'll please call the roll.
Yes, Directors Borja. Conklin.
Here.
Corona Sabagnano.
Here.
Devlin.
Here.
And Raythel.
Here.
And we do have our quorum.
If you'll all please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If you'll please make the announcements for this evening.
I certainly will. So the county fosters public engagement during the meeting and encourages public participation, civility, and use of courteous language. To make an in-person public comment, please complete a speaker request form and hand it to the clerk. The chairperson will call your name when it's your turn to make a comment. To make a public comment by telephone on the day of the meeting, dial 916-875-2500 to make a verbal public comment. Follow the prompts for instructions. Refer to the agenda and listen to the live meeting to determine when the best time is to call to be placed in queue for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter. Callers may be on hold for up to an extended period of time and should plan accordingly. When the chairperson opens public comment for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter, callers will be transferred from the queue into the meeting to make a verbal comment. Each agenda item queue will remain open until the public comment period is closed for that specific item. You may also send a written comment to boardclerk@saccounty.gov, and your comment will be routed to the board and filed in the record.
Thank you. That moves us to our non-contested portion of our agenda tonight. Please call item number 1.
So your item number 1 this evening is PLNP 2024-00007. It's the 2030 General Plan Annual Report for calendar year 2023, and there's no environmental document. It's not applicable.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nathan Sedefine. I will be presenting on the General Plan Annual Report update.
Metro, can you please start the PowerPoint for this item?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So as part of this report, we go through this every year and primarily go over the implementation of major projects and programs every year. The first of which is the environmental justice element. This was adopted in 2019, and we have continued implementation work on this effort in 2023. This is part of Attachment 4, which is the EJ report card, and lists how the EJ measures are being implemented. Our role as the planning department is to track EJ implementation and raise interdepartmental awareness of its programs. And this past year, we continued our implementation tracking and stakeholder outreach, which you can view in the report card between pages 3 and 7. Next is the Community-Wide Climate Action Plan, which is mentioned in Attachment 1 on page 2. This is also part of the larger Environmental Justice Initiative. This past year, our work continued from the board direction to revise the CAP in September 22. This is following the guidance from the California Air Resources Board draft 2022 scoping plan update regarding climate change. Staff also wants to make sure that the CAP is responsive to AB 1279, which sets a target for statewide carbon neutrality by 2045. For this effort, staff published the notice of preparation for the subsequent EIR in December 2023. Ongoing work for this effort includes redeveloping forecasts and targets and revising greenhouse gas reduction measures, and it's anticipated to go to the board this year. I would also like to mention our work on the conservation element, which is mentioned in page 2 of the report. The element identified an implementation measure to make the county a certified local government. I'll touch on this later in the presentation. In regard to housing element implementation, this includes the Regional Housing Needs Allocation for the County, or RHNA. 2023 was year 3 of cycle 6, which is from 2021 to 2029. There are 4 affordable housing projects that were in process in 2023. This includes Terracina at Wildhawk, Mission Avenue Apartments East and West, so split into 2 projects, and Beach Hill Apartments. Terracina at Wildhawk was allocated 145 affordable units, 45 of which are very low income and 99 of which are low income. And then Mission Avenue Apartments East was 4 out of 33 affordable units that are very low income. And the western portion of that is 5 out of 48 that are very low income, and Beach Hill Apartments has 16 very low income and 13 lower income units. I want to mention we are still making progress towards our RHNA goal. The table showing this progress is on the next slide, but I do want to note that RHNA is an allocation of housing at a range of affordability levels determined by SACOG and required by Housing, Community, and Development. And there are no requirements to build this housing. This is a goal that we essentially meet as a county. The next is the programs under Senate Bill 2. SB 2 funding is what we use to complete zoning, code, and general plan design guidelines amendments, and we'll be reporting on the rezoning project that would help further meet our RHNA goals. This project was initiated by the board in late 2021, and this past year we issued a notice of preparation of an environmental document. Staff continue to reach out and engage with the owners of these sites, and we are on target for the state mandated deadline of fall 2024. Prior to the board hearing, the Planning Commission will see an update on that this spring. For the tally of our regional housing needs allocation, I do want to note we are making progress towards meeting our RHNA goal and have issued permits for about 600 to 700 units of housing for years 1 and 2, respectively. And this year we issued permits for 855 units. I want to note that the county itself does not build housing, so we depend on partnerships with SHRA and the private developer community to help meet that affordable housing need. I want to highlight a housing project that is included within this tally, which is the Power in Road project. It consists of 194 units, 2 of which are set aside for management staff, and is adjacent to the Florin Safe State communities. There will be a larger discussion on affordable housing coming up at the special board meeting workshop on April 10th, where this report will also be presented. Next, I want to go over all the implementation measures that have been covered to date. These are also outlined in attachment 3. This graph shows the progress we've made on implementation measures in each of the general plan elements covered to date. Green means complete, yellow means implementation measures that have made some progress, and red means those that have made no progress or the implementation measures are no longer applicable. We have covered 7 elements thus far. You might see 6 up there. That's because last year we covered the Delta protection element, which has implementable policies, but not measurable implementation measures that can be put on this chart. Out of the implementation measures we have covered, 38% are complete and 62% are incomplete. That includes those that are either in progress or have made no progress. This year we covered the energy element. This starts on page 5 of the implementation measure status report on attachment 3. A few highlights from the energy element include the expansion and development of van pooling and carpooling programs, part of implementation measure 9 of the energy element, as well as the completion of the 2022 active transportation plan. This includes bikeways and pedestrian master plans as well. Oops, I'm going to go back. So I do want to note that there are certain issues that we face in regard to tracking implementation and why it seems most of these measures have not been complete to date. We're finding that this is due to the age, size, and sheer number of programs and implementation measures across the general plan. First, I want to note the awareness of these implementation measures. This is due to a lot of staff turnover over the years, and it's been because of that, it's been hard for departments to keep track of the progress towards these measures, and some are unaware that these exist. The second factor I want to note is the age of some of the elements. Some policies were carried over from 1993 or as far back as the 1970s, like in the energy element. Since then, there has been restructuring and new policies that have changed the landscape of how the county operates. The energy element also shows how much these implementation measures have aged relative to where modern technology and renewable energy practices are today. This includes electric vehicle charging initiatives and certain energy efficiency proposals that are mentioned in the forthcoming Climate Action Plan. In terms of size, I do want to note that the general plan has a total of 686 implementation measures, which is quite large across the general plan. I do want to note that one of planning's work program objectives that we're going to be mentioning later in this presentation is to work on the scoping for the general plan update to make sure it is implementable. We're working on the scoping for that this year. As for growth strategies, regarding infill, the goal for this strategy is to highlight vacant and underutilized properties and revitalizing commercial corridors. The general plan stated we could have between 19,000 to 37,000 units within infill areas, 10 to 18,000 of which can be vacant or underutilized properties, and 19,000 potential units would be along commercial corridors. We've been working on several projects to meet this need, one of which is the RENA Rezone project, which I mentioned earlier. All candidate sites are either infill or located within a commercial corridor for corridor plans that are being contemplated or have already been prepared. The environmental review for this will conclude in 2024 and be considered by the board. The next project I want to mention is Stockton Boulevard, which is part of the Regional Early Action Planning Grant, or REAP grant. This aims to increase density within the Stockton Boulevard Special Planning Area, or SPA. Next is the infill program, which is funded by the Local Early Action Planning Grant. This is still in its draft form. Adoption is anticipated in fall of 2024. This includes policy and code changes, as well as a list of recommendations to incentivize infill development. I would like to note that this will also be mentioned and discussed at an upcoming special board meeting workshop on April 10th. The next project under infill is the North Watt Avenue Corridor Plan, which is part of the Green Means Go funding program, and this is intended to streamline review for infill development along North Watt Avenue. Next are our approved growth areas. These are for areas that aren't yet completely built out, and many have yet to begin construction. Planning has been tracking capacity in 3 vineyard areas, one of which is Florin Vineyard Gap, the other is North Vineyard Station, as well as Vineyard Springs. I would like to highlight the work that was done this past year on streamlining transportation requirements in North Vineyard. Planning coordinated with DOT and county engineering to make modifications to roadway improvement triggers that have been hampering development. The board adopted a major amendment to North Vineyard Station specific plan to implement the updated North Vineyard Station transportation mitigation strategy in February of 2023. This was also well received by the developer community. And then lastly on the slide is pending master plans. Antelope Acres just got added to our list of pending master plans, which we'll cover in a subsequent slide. These plans project to add about 48,000 residential units. So this is a chart of our approved growth areas, or correcting myself, a table of our approved growth areas. There are a total of 12 growth areas that will result in about 59,000 units, including Rancho Murrieta, and these numbers have not changed since last year's report. Next is our pending master plans. Antelope Acres was recently added to this list. Please note that these numbers are not final. They are adjusted as plans become refined over time. The number of residential units has been updated to reflect changes to some of these plans in 2023. The total pending residential units across all of these master plans is 48,495. And then next comes our work programs for this upcoming year, or the work program for this upcoming year. We're going to be continuing work on environmental justice implementation through the executive working group and supporting environmental justice-oriented projects. We already discussed the community-wide climate action plan earlier, and we'll be continuing work on that this year. And then next is the certified local government program. Planning will work with the Office of Historic Preservation and other agencies to strengthen local decision-making regarding historic places, as well as explore CEQA streamlining for projects that could be part of this effort. Under our local early action planning or LEAP grant program, planning will continue working on ADU construction plans through our marketing strategy. This is slated to be completed this year and is in the middle of plan check, and we already went to commission this year and is going to the board in May. We also continue working on by right supportive housing ordinance, which is one of staff's top priorities, as well as the infill program, which is slated for adoption, as I mentioned earlier, fall 2024. As for the housing element implementation, we will continue working on rezone and the affordable housing ordinance update. Continuing on our work program priorities, we will continue to refine objective development standards for Stockton Boulevard. And for North Watt Avenue, we will begin looking into updating the plan starting this year. We will focus on finding ways to incentivize infill housing and commercial economic development. What's particularly interesting about these two projects is we're also working with DOT in parallel on transportation projects that are also underway along these corridors. So there's this dual approach for much needed housing and transportation projects in tandem. And then lastly, we will begin working on a draft work plan for the general plan update late this year or early next year. I do want to note that this item is a receive and file for the Planning Commission. However, these recommendations are for the board. Recommendations include receiving and filing the 2023 annual report, directing staff to submit the report to the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, as well as Housing and Community and Development, and directing staff to proceed with general plan implementation, including projects outlined in the work program of the report. And that's the end of the presentation. I can take your questions.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Questions for staff this evening? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. As a really good summary of the tremendous work that the county's been pursuing. I had a couple of questions, actually. I was hoping you might be able to just illuminate and provide a little clarity. I saw on page 27B1 where there's regular meetings with organizations such as BIA, coordination, kind of, I think, reviewing fee schedules and just kind of a collaborative effort there in hopes of helping to better understand their barriers and challenges as we're trying to grapple with very low and low income housing needs. But as I was looking above that in A8, which typically in your commercial, you have your multifamily housing, I didn't see where there was maybe similar coordinative efforts with organizations that represent multifamily builders and developers, and I was just kind of wondering if you might be able to kind of shed some light on what the county staff is doing in that regard.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. For that, I'm going to actually throw it over to some of my esteemed colleagues.
I'll answer that one. Commissioner Conklin, Todd Smith, Planning Director. So we do obviously meet with folks like the Building Industry Association, Northern California. I know as part of the work on the infill program, not just these staff, but prior staff before them reached out, did an extensive amount of outreach with infill builders. We have a pretty substantial spreadsheet. It's not part of this package, but trying to understand what are the barriers that they experience, whether it's fee-related, infrastructure-related, design components, to tackle some of those barriers in specifically infill communities. So it's not just the BIA, it's all the smaller builders as well.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I just saw absence there, and I knew there was presumably something, some groups there. I just wanted to make sure they were highlighted if there were. So very appreciative. Also, on page 42, I think it's G5, the county's doing some studying on just cause eviction ordinances, helping those that are precariously housed tenants to kind of retain in their homes. And I'm just kind of wondering if we're also as staff, meeting with similar groups and who they may be in collecting that information?
I think this would be something.
Another
that
pun.
Take that one
Yeah,
too?
sorry.
Sure, that's fine. That's why I'm here.
Yes.
And by the way, I want you to introduce Nathan Serafin. He's one of our most recent long-range planning staff, which is why he doesn't have a lot of the background, but he's done a great
Presentation was excellent.
yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate
Done
that.
a great job in putting this together, and all the new long-range plan staff have. As it relates to outreach on this item G5, tenant protections, we have corresponded with Sacramento Housing Alliance, plus a number of other housing advocacy groups over the years. We are actively working with, through our Department of Homeless Services and Housing on the Renters Helpline component. That's one of the programs that's also mentioned in the housing element that we, the county, fund through certain contracting providers to help establish tenant protections from legal aspects of housing. Both of those entities we would engage if we were to move forward with an ordinance like this. I do know there have been recent conversations at the board level, specifically around the potential to kick this off. I don't know, obviously, what the outcome of that will be, but it's on everybody's minds.
And that is scheduled for later this year, is that correct? Or
It's not currently scheduled. They're just in the beginning stages of
beginning
discussions.
stages? Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that there was kind of a holistic data collection from those that represent not only tenants and tenant rights, but also property owners, and as they're obviously, I imagine, have also some ideas and solutions to offer as well. So thank you very much. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Other questions for staff this evening? Commissioner Borja?
Thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate it. Just a couple of questions. For the planned growth areas, I'm assuming those numbers we can't count yet for arena purposes.
I believe not. I believe there's staff who have been working on these growth areas, but this is right now. I don't believe they're counted. If anybody can add detail to that.
That is correct. Just the ones in progress. And I will say, for RENA purposes, we're looking at zoning designations, and some of these approved growth areas do not yet have zoning. That's a constraint that we're trying to figure out as it relates to the Elk Grove Unified School District geographic area. They have a Melrose program that kicks in when they get to urban zoning, and so developers are less likely to go to rezone until they're really ready to move forward with construction.
Understood. Second question is kind of looking at some of our low-income RENA numbers. I did see on one of the attachments that we've made some improvements year after year of the number of permitted applications for low-income units, but it doesn't seem like we're making quite a dent. Like year after year, it's like 200 units. Is that more so a product of not as many developers are applying for these types of units, or is it more so just a challenge of getting these ones approved? Because I think the number's about 7,000, and if the arena is kind of getting higher every year and we're only making a dent of 200 per year, I don't know whether or not we're going to be able to catch up with that number.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify for that slide that has the table on it for the RENA numbers. That is for the permits that have been given out. It's not necessarily counting on one end the units that have been built and have like a certificate of occupation and those that in which developers have applied. It's basically permits. This is part of a larger tally that we submit to the HCD and OPR. But it just draws directly from the permitting. It doesn't really tally the applications. But in regard to why we haven't gotten there, I think I would still throw that over to my colleagues.
All right, so to answer your question, Commissioner Borja, there are a number of, I'll say, challenges to achieving the RENA targets or allocations. Obviously, we have a number of applications in progress, but most of those, at least on the affordable, very low and low income categories, A lot of them are competing for the same amount of dollars as it relates to tax credits or other county funds, because we have the Affordable Housing Ordinance and the Housing Trust Fund, where we get fees that are paid on a per square foot basis, residential, non-residential. All those funds go into a pot, and that's administered by SHRA, and they do an RFP process a couple times a year. And so there's limited resources from a financial perspective that can go to those projects. There's also, depending on where a project is located, there are very real infrastructure challenges. And obviously, you know, an affordable builder is going to do their own due diligence when they select sites to make sure that there's adequate infrastructure in place. One of the things, and you heard Nathan mention this a few times, we're bringing a workshop to the Board of Supervisors April 10th, specifically to talk about some of these challenges, whether they're regulatory challenges, meaning county code or zoning code barriers, but also financial challenges. And so we're going to be asking the board to weigh in from a policy perspective on both of those pieces. Can we, the county, set up some sort of financial incentives or fee offset programs, obviously within legal constraints, such that we can incentivize more affordable housing? But it's a complex problem.
Understood. I think kind of just following up to your answer, sir, about there's a larger data set that you've provided to HCD. I was hoping that on that data set, we, the county, cannot be perceived as the barrier to entry for that, but rather it's all of these other, like you mentioned, Director Smith, all of these other extenuating circumstances. I guess from my perspective, really the biggest concern is, you know, with the recent laws that have been passed that are now enacted, the AG's office, their strike force has a little bit more teeth. We've seen some of our partner jurisdictions in this region that's been challenged kind of legally. I just want to make sure that it's within our power to be able to control some of those things and not inadvertently, you know, have this semantics or this optics that, you know, the county might be the spigot that's kind of holding things accountable. So if it's a limitation of funds and if it's an SHRA, there's an over-competitiveness for the credits, then that's a whole nother story. But if it's more of a procedural thing where, you know, someone might say, and again, I'm just making this up, that X amount of builders have, you know, submitted X amount of applications. However, the county have, from that, on their, you know, timeliness and the 5 meeting, they've only, you know, provided 200 permits in a given fiscal year. I guess that's kind of my concern. But if it's not there, they're not coming out and they're all competing for the same funds, and it's a completely different argument that we can make.
Yeah, I'd say I think it's a combination of things. Like I said earlier, obviously we've got a number of applications in the queue, and obviously we don't control when an individual developer decides to move forward to construction and submitting for plan check and that sort of thing. But that's the purpose of the April 10th workshop, is to get the board to make the policy call and direct staff to remove some of those barriers that are within our control.
Understood. Thank you. And just one last question. You had made mention about the North Vineyard example for the traffic mitigation triggers. And it seemed like some of the developers in that specific community like that movement. Is there any appetite for the county staff to perhaps, I don't know, kind of leverage that example and use that to some of the other planned areas moving forward in the future?
There is a mention of the Alberta specific plan. It's not necessarily, I can't speak to whether it's going to be the same exact kind of measure, but we are looking at other areas in which there are more barriers to building housing as well. The mention of the Alberta specific plan is in our report. Actually, let me get that page for you in one moment. So that is on page 9. So we basically are as part of how we're looking at different gaps that we can fill as part of that development strategy, we're looking at the other areas as well. So Alberta specific plan, one of them.
Okay.
I'll say, in addition to what Nathan just said, the Department of Transportation really was looking at retrofitting, for lack of a better term, the transportation mitigation approach in those older plan areas. I think Commissioner Borja, you're familiar with the work on the Jackson Corridor and the new dynamic tool. So they're applying that, which is currently the process for those 4 newer projects that they developed, and trying to apply it to other plan areas previously approved. And so Alberta is next on the list after they got through the vineyard plans. We'll see whether we can also apply it in some of the other ones, for example, Easton and Glenboro. But right now, the next one is Alberta.
Would that be something that your team might bring up on the April 10th workshop as another option for the county to consider? Hey, we're somewhat lowering the barrier for entry for some developers by creating some sort of flexibility for the roadway improvement triggers?
I think that's a possibility. I think obviously I'm not a transportation engineer, but so part of that equation on each one of those plan areas is understanding the cash flow as it relates to smaller projects within those plan areas, and whether the fee programs in those plan areas can work from a cash flow perspective. But it's definitely something that's in our toolbox.
Understood. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, excuse me. Jacob Daw, I'm an associate planner. A few things I wanted to mention to Commissioner Borja's second question about not wanting the county to be the barrier to affordable housing. There are a few projects and programs that we completed last year and we're looking to start this year. So the county did receive a pro-housing designation from the State Department or HCD. And so that makes us not only the marketing, the publicity of being a pro-housing jurisdiction, we're also eligible for various grant opportunities now that we've been applying for to try and pool into the SHRA funds, the Affordable Housing Fund that does have that restricted resources. So we're making progress there, and we're keeping an eye out for more grants. And then we are going to be looking to initiate the update of our affordable housing ordinance this year as well. So that'll be reevaluating the current ordinance, how effective it was, and then proposing some alternatives to see if we can juice it up a little bit. And that feeds directly into those SHRA funds as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Commissioner Devlin, do you have a question? Commissioner Corona-Sabagnano?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that, the affordable housing ordinance update. Is that part of the April 10th meeting, or what's the timeline of that specifically? I'm looking at the inclusionary housing piece.
We're going to be looking to probably kick that off in the beginning of the next fiscal year. There is some additional funding that we'll need for some consultant work to do some of the economic feasibility study, as well as the fee matrix study to see what fees were appropriate. And so as part of the housing element program, we're also going to be studying the feasibility of the inclusionary component. So we'll likely be trying to kick that off in the new fiscal year, but we're starting the scoping for that and the work plan for that next month.
Okay. Has the county had the inclusionary housing previously? Yeah. Okay.
I believe it was excluded from it was an option in the current ordinance that was approved in 2013. There weren't any circumstances where we could require inclusionary housing. I believe there was an effort to explore it in our master plans, and then due to staffing and various reasons that kind of stalled out, and we're looking to kind of roll that into this more holistic update. So we'll be looking at all that, but right now it's not a mandatory. There's no mandatory component for it.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff this evening? I got a few. Can you talk a little bit, you said the affordable housing projects that were proposed in 2023 were 3 months into 2024. So just kind of want to get an understanding. Are those held up on our side, or are those developers that are in the application process but they're waiting on funding? Sorry. Yes. There we go.
That's a good question. This is Jessica Brandt with Planning, and those are in my shop. So I figured I'd help out a little bit. It varies. I think, kind of touching on what Todd had mentioned. Some of the applicants are dealing with just sort of property issues. We have one in particular that the property they thought they were developing was actually partially still county right-of-way, and so they are having to deal with that issue. We have others that are working through some community opposition issues, ones that do have to come through an entitlement process just because they're in a neighborhood preservation area. And then the other ones are moving through the process and updating. Usually the issue is that they have to meet a certain, they can only deviate from a certain number of development standards in order to remain non-discretionary. And often that's still hard to do with our development standards. So that's one of the items that is being brought up at that workshop. So we're working through those issues with a couple of sites as well. We have had a couple that have gone through and are successful and are actually building. So just kind of want to throw that out there too. They do get through. It does take a little while though.
And with just a follow-up question on the inclusionary housing fee. So it was repealed in 2014. So the county actually, there's no fee that goes to SHRA for single-family development in the county?
There is. So there was a change in 2014 in the Affordable Housing Ordinance. Previously, it did have an inclusionary requirement for certain types of projects. It was changed to a fee option. So right now, there's on the residential side, a fee per square foot, and there's an annual escalator for that fee that every March it elevates based on an index. Those funds then go into the Affordable Housing Fund, which is administered by SHRA. Those funds are pooled and put into the RFP programs that the SHRA administers every year. There are also other ways, not just a fee option. There's in the master plan areas, as staff alluded to, a couple of them have what we call an affordable housing strategy, which is a combination of either land dedication, construction of affordable units, or fee payment. Two of the master plans in the Jackson Highway Corridor have combined land dedication and fee payment. We're actively working with a third right now where they're looking at doing a combination of all three, just because of the scale and their interest in actually getting some housing built. Obviously, that will take some time given the magnitude of those projects, but it's been a combination of things over the years.
And can you talk a little bit about the deed restricted versus non-deed restricted? I'm much more familiar with the deed restricted side of affordable housing, and so how are we counting non-deed restricted? Does the builder then telling us what the house sells for or what the apartment rents for, and we're doing the math and counting those even though there's no like affordable housing contribution to that? Or is this only projects that have received some sort of affordable housing funding that's on the list?
So the deed restriction comes into play when projects have received funding through SHRA or have otherwise, for example, those land dedication projects, they're dedicated to SHRA. There's a 30-year deed restriction on them to maintain the affordability. SHRA does an annual report on those projects. It goes to the board sometime in April, May timeframe, where they document the ongoing monitoring, the rent levels, things of that nature. So it's primarily managed through SHRA.
But the non-deed restricted units, how are we even identifying those?
I'm not, if it is related to density, I'm not familiar specific with the non-deed restricted units, but the state legislation and HCD kind of, they, at least for RENA purposes, identify income levels based on the density. So if a property is zoned at least a maximum density of 30 units per acre, at least for RENA vacant land inventory, and as far as state legislation goes, it's considered a low income, has low income potential. And so if it has a density lower than that, it goes to moderate or high income. So in theory, if you develop at the maximum density for that site, you know, based on how many units you're having in the area, they would be lower income. There's no deed restriction in place to ensure that, but that's the theory behind it, is that the density by default lowers the rents.
Okay. That makes sense. So we're not going out and having to try to figure out what these houses are selling for after the fact that we have no control over. Cool.
I also want to mention SPAs are included in that as well. And this whole chart actually documenting which zones correspond to the lower income units. is in our housing element as well. It's and approved by HCD.
Okay. Any other questions for staff this evening? All right. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you so much.
All right. And we have a motion to receive and file, or we have to make a recommendation, or we're just good. We move on to item number 2. All right.
And there are no public comments for item number 1.
Perfect. Thanks for catching that. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the miscellaneous portion of our agenda. Planning.
So for
Sorry, go
item
ahead.
number 2, we have the planning director's report.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. This is the report back on wireless communication facility regulations and the review process. And when I say we, I mean Jessica prepared this 3-page memo that summarizes a number of the applicable regulations, and there's an attachment that includes applicable portions of our zoning code. Rather than me reading the memo, which I think would be just painful for you all, I want to assume that you all have read it, and we can cover the highlights, or Jessica can give you any further details, but really wanted to have a little bit of a dialogue about any questions you all might have or clarifications.
We're not used to you hiding things in the planning director's report section of the agenda.
I was going to say,
but-
did you see it? Did everyone see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good, all right.
All right, questions for the staff or clarifications? Sounds to me like there is a couple of action items, and maybe this was already in process, but the supplemental application, that's a new thing that's being implemented, or is this something
Yeah.
that,
Yeah, so the supplemental application, I think we put it out on the website, might be 2 months now at this point. But it does try to capture a lot of those additional items that we need in order to get to whether or not we can make the findings to approve the wireless facilities. So I think we're still talking with, just so you know, with corporate counsel for T-Mobile, because they're concerned about the requirement that a building permit application be submitted concurrently with their entitlement. They believe that the FCC regulations don't require that, just that there's a shot clock that would be applicable to the building permit, similar to the shot clock timeline requirement that's applicable to the entitlement. So we are looking into that currently. So right now we have it on this supplemental application, but we're working with the individual providers as they come in on that one.
and the idea of requiring that in a concurrent basis is so we have all of the actual dimensions and data on there that we wouldn't have in an entitlement process, or?
It's more to try to get a jump start on the building permit component of the review. If we do indeed only have 150 days to get them through an entitlement and any subsequent permitting, we need to get them in the door fairly early. So that was the thought behind that one.
Got it.
And there was pushback on that from the applicant?
One particular council asked us to take another look at it and provided some additional citations. I think the concern, which seemed reasonable, was that because it's an entitlement process they go through first, there may be changes to where the actual siting ends up, what the structure looks like. And to get to a building permit stage, they would have had to go through engineering for the tower, soil, testing and those sorts of things, which, they were arguing that they would rather not do until they get through the entitlement, or at least a good way through, to have a better sense that, they spending the money for the actual development of the site was worthwhile. So again, we're looking into it a little bit more, but was something that came up. Otherwise, they seemed amenable to the other items that we had added into this. And it helps them too. It's more, a little more certainty as they bring in their application, that they'll be able to cover all of the items that we need to review.
Another question?
Well, and to the, unrelated to the previous, and to the potential conditioning, and maybe this is more for Bill, of the conditioning of the additional 20 feet that they supposedly have by right. Is there, I mean, is there an opportunity, or are we clearly prohibited from saying, no, you have to come back if you want that additional 20 feet? You're at 80 feet. You don't get to add on another 20 feet, so this becomes 100 foot.
Yeah, no, I think it's ministerial, and I have not double-checked that, but that's kind of been our understanding.
Has anybody tested that?
No, I can go back
sued?
and I can double-check the regs. I mean, I can tell you, in general, the regs completely favor telecommunications applicants.
Yeah, it's considered an eligible facility, and there's a special set of provisions within the regulations that allow that additional height to be placed ministerially for additional antennas.
Within the FCC?
Yeah,
And that's to allow co-location.
that's the idea.
If so, they can't just request an extra 20 feet to move their stuff up 20 feet.
Right.
They have to be co-locating with another provider?
That part I don't know.
I think that's the idea. It's to
that's the
it's
idea.
to incentivize co-location.
Whether it's prohibiting them from moving their stuff up to co-locate someone below, I
Sure.
don't know. Yeah.
But are our police powers automatically preempted?
Yes. On a lot of this, yes. Federal law, Telecommunications Act, and the FCC has made, the FCC issues, they're not even regulations, there's decisions, but we're still kind of at their mercy on things like shot clock and, what did you call it again? Is it,
Eligible
facilities,
yeah.
yes. What they consider to be minor addition for co-location purposes. So yeah, we're kind of stuck just having to, as we have been, look at a proposal, and if it's 70 feet, we have to kind of understand, oh, well, it could be 80 or 90, whatever that additional amount is.
But have we thought more about our comfort level with including a condition of approval in the future that requires the same screening be used? Like we did, I think, on the last application.
The same design? You mean the same stealth design? Is that what?
Correct. So we wouldn't end up with an extra 20 feet of
I've always assumed,
palm
I've assumed
above the,
that that's going to apply to the additional increment.
Yeah, the way
But we
that
could make that more clear.
We could. The way that the regulations read, it's the addition shall not, it's not destroy, but it's like it shouldn't negate the stealth that's required. So the idea is that if they're putting that on, it needs to follow whatever stealthing is going on.
You found that language
I did,
last time
yeah.
or a month ago.
Yeah, defeat. It shall not defeat the stealthing. So,
And-
I mean, we can do a condition, but it's effectively mirroring what's already required.
Sure.
and are we chasing a red herring? Do we have a lot of projects that are coming in adding 20 feet for co-location, or were there 700 of these last year in the county?
I have no
or
idea
were
because
there
they're,
zero?
they're
We wouldn't
ministerial.
know.
Yeah. We could ask the building inspection folks and see. My understanding, talking to some of the providers, is that it isn't something that they often see because, again, going back to the structural component of their towers and how they build them, they're not usually building with an eye towards adding more. They're building to whatever they need, and then they'll co-locate folks below. Take that as you will. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, I think having an understanding of what that number is would be helpful. And I do appreciate the supplemental application requests because I've been sitting here for a few years, and there's a lot of things that are included on there that we've had to ask for later or weren't included in
Right.
the packet. And so trying to understand whether we're really looking at the best available site to provide an exception from the code it was a tough call to make. So I appreciate you guys strengthening that and making sure we have all the data we need.
And I think to that point, Commissioner Wraithel, excuse me, that was born out of, that the supplemental application was born out of our experience and frankly frustration trying to get that information from some applicants and them being reluctant to do so until such time as they come to a hearing and things blow up.
Mm-hmm.
With a 150-day clock ticking. Understood.
Yeah.
You know, one additional thought, just going back to the concurrent applications for the use permit and building permit, it does there is a challenge there because ordinarily our use permit, the conditions are all written in a way where, the applicant has to do this, do X, Y, and Z before a building permit. So if you've got the building permit being processed at the same time, that makes it difficult, if not impossible, for them to fulfill conditions. So I don't know the extent to which
It's a limited amount. We effectively, it would be that initial review, some of the structural review from building, but then planning wouldn't be able to sign off on it. So it would sit until the entitlement was complete. So again, it was just kind of more just trying to claw back some of that time. But honestly, for the most part, if there's a new tower and they need an entitlement, we almost always ask for a tolling agreement to get more time, just because we have CEQA documentation that needs to be done. We've got to go through all of our advisory councils, and 150 days goes real quick. And they're usually amenable to it, as long as they have an understanding that there's, an estimated timeline overall that seems reasonable to them. So that's nice.
This quick question, but does staff find the requirements of blending in and stealth by design to be challenging if a potential applicant brings a design that is just not native to a specific, region?
Yes.
There's a couple of instances where a monopalm, there's some monopalms in certain areas, and that's what it came out. I mean, is there a way for us to strengthen our guidance on that? I don't even want to say regs, but it's more so guidance.
I think that's a good question. I do think there's opportunity to strengthen what we have. There are allowances within the FCC regulations, and there's been case law that allow the local jurisdictions to deny a facility on aesthetic grounds, but you have to have aesthetic standards. And we're very limited in the aesthetic standards that we have. We have height, and you tried to make some sort of attempt to stealth in some way. And that is kind of it. And there's really a lot more we could do. There's other cities that have put in a lot more effort on that. You can't block view sheds. There's lots of other things that we could do. So yes, I do think there's opportunity. There's a really good example of one that we're working with them right now. They proposed a monopine in effectively the middle of an industrial yard, and it's completely out of context. The scale is way off, and ultimately talking to them, they said, well, we thought you'd want a tree, so we made it a tree. And it was like, well, actually something that's more of a standard, just a monopole that blends a little bit more with all of the cranes that are standing there behind it, with the coloring and, matte painting and stuff like that, actually would blend this a lot better than this huge 80-foot tree. And so, that kind of thing, that's the sort of flip side of us not having as much depth in the regulations, because we can work with them on a more contextual basis. But yeah, those are the sort of things that I think staff is getting more savvy to as well, and not just sort of taking whatever's given and pushing it through, is actually looking at the context and saying, this doesn't really look right. or it's not a native tree. I also brought, yeah. So this is another thing that's coming up. The materials that are used in a lot of the stealthing, the leaves and especially the pine needles do wear out over time. The pine needles, yeah. And it has actually caused some issues where there's been effectively a lot of pollution going out there where the needles are falling off, and it sort of defeats its own stealthing when all the needles fall off and it's just dead branches and it just looks like a dead pine tree. And so these are things that have been provided for various projects that have come through, and we have whole branches if you want them. But staff I think is looking more at matte painting. We have one project that's in Cordova that is actually more of almost like an art piece where they have it, and it is sort of I don't even know how to describe it. It's kind of an upside down triangle. It comes down and then it has like an ombre paint, and then they're going to light it. And so it's going to look more sort of like, I think they're even doing purples, kind of go with the whole King's theme. And it's in an urban area, and it makes a lot more sense.
Public art look
Kind of public
instead.
art sort of thing, yeah. So I think we're trying to kind of go that direction a little more than this here. But again, it's a lot of the times it's a negotiation with the applicants, and they do want to show that they're doing something to address our regulations on that.
So is there any obligation or enforcement of ensuring that the upkeep, I guess, of these deteriorating assets that the ISPs have, and their faux or masking or stealthing? Obviously, Sacramento is a very hot, arid area, and these fine needles are deteriorating probably much quicker. So is there what tools are in our toolbox to ensure that they're not just branches after 18 months?
So we do condition upkeep and maintenance generally, and then of whatever stealthing material they have. Unfortunately, the way things work is it's kind of a complaint-based system. So if we do get complaints about a facility, a code case will be opened, code enforcement officers will take a look. We have had that happen. There's a site that's on a park facility, and branches that were actually coming off of it and landing on the ground. And so that was something where we opened up a code case and they fixed the system. But that's it. We don't have any sort of
Primarily dependent upon our resources for
yeah,
enforcement.
yeah.
Okay.
And we don't necessarily. Some jurisdictions actually include they actually bond. They'll have the facility post a bond, and if they aren't doing upkeep, or if it changes, or if it's abandoned, then the jurisdiction can take the bond and take care of the facility. That was talked about for a facility in Orangevale. I don't think we ended up, I think the county just ended up paying to take it down as like a community beautification project because it was an old tower that was abandoned. So that's another thing to consider. We don't have that in our code currently.
We've done that for solar projects.
Yeah.
None of which I think are at the end of their lifespan yet, where we've had to collect on a bond, but we've included that condition.
I don't know what our success rate would be, because really what they do is they go out and insure the bond, right? And then we have to try to collect from somebody who's bankrupt, right, typically?
No, well,
Is that bond posted, like it's not actual money sitting in the county's bank account, right?
no. You go to a reputable financial institution, they have to post the bond. there are time limits for us to act on the event, which allows us to collect on the bond. But as long as we do that, we've done it in other circumstances before.
It takes a lot to get there, though.
Okay. I was just thinking back to, Great Recession. I don't think there was a lot of success with collecting from developers that had posted bonds on projects that got walked away from half finished, right?
Well, we wouldn't have had bonds, I think. I don't think we would have had bonds to try and finish those or clean up those projects. We have bonds for things like doing the infrastructure. I mean, that's what the example I'm thinking of is doing sidewalks. And we require applicants to post bonds for that. I know we've gone and called in a bond and just walked over to the bank and had a check issued, and it's been pretty simple. Sometimes not, but it can be pretty straightforward.
Well, for my part, I just want to say I would be fully supportive of developing some aesthetic standards. I don't know if this is an end of 27 or an early 28 work plan item, but do you guys need any direction from us in order to move down this road or get it added to your work plan? I know you guys have a short list of things that you're working on.
A short list, right.
Short list.
I think this feedback tonight is sufficient for me, and hearing this conversation, not the first time, but we've heard it before, right? The same sentiment. I think we will add it to the list. It comes into discussion with the board every year when we put together our priority list of things, and then it's up to the board to fund it. So,
And I think the only other thing I'd like to add is that I'm fully supportive of the public art approach. It used to be these were flagpoles or other things that we could use, but as far as putting up a basic pole at an industrial site, I would agree with you. It's really very much dependent on the site, whether a large tree, a large eucalyptus would make sense. So I'm fully supportive of that. Any other comments on this item tonight? All right. Thank you guys for doing that. We'll move on to miscellaneous scheduling items.
Okay. So the next meeting is April 8th, and we have 2 items. The first one is a time extension, map time extension, and the second is a proposal to rescind a minor use permit requirement for restaurants that serve alcohol. And so that will be next time on the 8th. And then the 22nd, looks like we have the zoning code updates that are reflecting state legislative changes are going to come your way for review. And then we are looking to get a large subdivision in the Orangevale community here. It's called Hazel Ridge. It is a bit controversial. Nothing, not Jesuit level controversial, but there's a little bit there. So as we get closer, you might have the applicant reach out or neighbors reach out.
Excellent. Anybody need to go out there and say, I'm not going to be there at either of those meetings? We're going to have a quorum at both meetings? Cool. We'll move on to generic public comments.
And there are no public comments.
All right. Thank you all for your time tonight. We did it in just under an hour, or just over an hour, so we'll go ahead and adjourn at 6:33. Have a good night.